Hey guys, and welcome on back. No, it's been a long time since I've done a recording, and it's been a while since we've seen some actual updates on the game. But I'm back at it, got things all situated in my life, and we're here again showcasing some more artwork and designs for the Balance project. So, to start it off with, I know there's just this big old flat plane. What I needed for the last bit of the final section of the end point of the game, or vertical slice that we have, is I needed to create the actual plane or the ground that the player is going to be walking around on, that everything's going to be placed on top of. So, as you can see, it's a very simple plane. It has very simple geometry, very low amount of faces, only sitting at like 64 faces. I really didn't need a lot. I just needed enough to just be able to create some hills, some like bumpiness, some information there for the player instead of just a flat land, because that's not fun if it's just flat. It's not going to be entertaining for the player to interact in that world. It's not going to look realistic if it's that flat. It needs some information to it. And I wanted to add in just this tiny little bump here that can hold a giant tree or just be a point of reference for the player. Because if it was just flat, it'd be boring, it'd be bland, it wouldn't feel realistic. So I added some bumps to it. Really nothing much here, just the Unreal guy being put to scale so that it looks like there's enough space here for some actual gameplay, depth of the world, things like that. So we have that, but the meatiest part of all this is what I've created in Substance Designer. So this is actually an old ground texture that I made it back when I was in school, and as you can see, it's the most complex shader I think I've ever really done. I've done a few other ones that are a little bit up to par to this one, but for ground textures and for just textures alone, this one has been the most involved and the most time consuming when you really think about it. It calls in actually two other designer maps that it uses to create the effects that we have in this texture map, and it's absolutely insane. We'll just focus on this. The other two maps that it's calling in are just things that are there to add in the masks and warping and depths and things like that. It's just kind of some black and white masks and information that we need to create things for, say, the height maps or ambient occlusions. They're just black and white maps. They don't even hold the information that this map holds. They're just a math function type of map or a math function program that we had to make for Substance Designer to be able to create something this complex. And you can see it right down here. As you get close to it, you can see the actual water underneath and the tiny little clumps of grass, some other little clumps of little things, rocks, pebbles, just all sorts of just hundreds and thousands of things just being placed right on top of each other. And that's exactly what I wanted for our ground texture. I needed something like this because the whole aspect of the game is that life is the infection, life is a disease, it's growing, it's ever changing, all that type of stuff. So the texture needed that. It needed this amount of insanity to create something so massive and so usable in so many ways for the game, because I can go over here in this entire section for water. There's this custom node here that I can literally just adjust the level of the water right away. So if we're going for something more swampy, there we go. If we're going, well, that a little. Here's more swampy. Something that's more of a swamp ground texture, it's right there. If we want something that's a bit more dry, well, then we have this. We still have the mud being wet because I don't envision this landscape ever really having a desert climate since life is so abundant. The closest we get to a desert type climate would be something like a tundra or a volcano environment where we have like soot and gravel and molten rocks and things like that. But even in that regard, a tundra would still be thriving with life in the fact of it'd be thriving with snow life. It'd be thriving in tundra life, which could be a lot of different types of plants that we know survive in tundras, like pine trees survive in a tundra quite easily. And even underneath the snow, there is still life that is thriving, bacterias and things like that. And I do hope to add in an effect in this game where we have bioluminescence going on. And that's what I have in the water right now. Is right now with the texture, it's kind of got this very glowing light blue effect to it. So you can see that there is definitely just life going nuts underneath here, bioluminescent life in as well. And so this texture has a lot with water. I can even, talking about frost, I can go here and literally just have this overflowing water that's all covered in ice. You can see that there's even some imperfections in the frost. I can even add some cracks to the frost once those show up. They're very small. Why are my cracks not showing up? Maybe I didn't fix that part. There are a few glitches with this one. I just started working with the frost a whole bunch, so it's kind of got its own mindset. There you go. Now you can see where we get our cracks in the frost. That might be linked to, we might be seeing issues with that linked in somewhere actually over here. You can see how I need to adjust some of the normal maps so that in normal maps and information over here to actually be able to have this covering the entire thing. I haven't delved into that too much. I'm not even that far into actually creating frosted environments and snow covered environments. I'm just now working on creating the slight bit of ground texture that I need for the game. And especially in this area, I don't even need any water, but I'm going to have just a slight puddle in the ground. I still like that because it makes it feel more alive for the world. Oh, sorry about that. And I can go into a little bit more extra details. We have over here in grass, we start with this waveform that we're squishing up into petals, and we turn it into a star type pattern over here. And we add some variances to them, and we just keep on adding things to that to then tell, okay, this is where you need to put the grass. This is the normal map information for the grass. We have our noise layers to create the dirt effect, and then that all goes into tons and tons of different networks and paths, and creating the gravels and the pebbles and all these things just go all over the place. You can see when we're done, our normal map is insanely dense, but it's gonna look great in the game. It's gonna really bring a lot of life into the game, and it's even still not that big of a map. Whoops, let's adjust it back over here. Come on. It's only at, again, a 1K texture. It's at 1024 by 1024, and for this being probably the most complex map texture that's going to be in the game, it's there with reason, though. It's got the most complexity to it because this ground texture can now be used wherever I need it. I can change the colors of everything on the flip of a switch, and that's what I need for a ground texture. I need a ground texture to be as robust and as usable as possible, because now for my entire game I only needed this one ground texture, and I can make multiple instances of this ground texture to be used throughout the game, which equates to a single call. One call to create this entire texture for the game. That's what we need. A lot of the times, game engines have to require on a lot more different things to create their calls, and especially for calling in textures, they have to really create too many different textures. And now I really don't need that. I might still have to create one or two, but like 5 ground textures versus your average game that could have over 50 ground textures. I'm liking my numbers more. If my game has to call in at any point 5 ground textures, I'm fine with that. It's calling in 5 ground textures with their masters in hundreds of instances. That's absolutely fine by me, because I'll probably need to create a ground texture for standing indoors. So like a wood or concrete, maybe not concrete, a wood or stone texture. And even then, if we're doing stone, I already have a rock texture. If I just adjust that rock texture more, I might be able to have stone, which then eliminates another ground texture. I don't need a stone ground texture. I might actually already have one now that I'm thinking about it. So all I'll need is create maybe a wood texture that has planks in it. Or most of the times, if I'm creating a wood texture for planks, for a wooden plank floor, I might actually just create wooden planks and instance the wooden planks across the floor as a 3D model, and then still only apply one texture. Not sure if that would be the prime way of going for creating that wood texture, but that's a way of doing it that might eliminate, again, needing another texture. A lot of different things that I go into, or that I think about when I'm creating my game right now, is how am I able to decrease loading times? How am I able to increase the amount of time that players get to actually play my game? Because when you look at a lot of games, you can look at, say, for Skyrim, for instance, they have tons of ground textures that are being used constantly throughout the game, and it's constantly being loaded, constantly having to stop gameplay, pause the game, and actually not even show a loading screen, but actually just stop the player altogether and glitch out for a little bit and then load in the rest of the game, depending on where the player is traveling in that world. And when you think about that, load screens in video games aren't actual gameplay. The player isn't doing anything but staring at a screen. So if you can eliminate those, you're then allowing your player to play your game for longer. So in a game like Skyrim that has tons of load screens, and the gameplay for the main storyline is, say, what, for that one, 25 hours. That's a good time frame for how long a Skyrim game can take to get from point A to point B, beginning to end, 25 hours. And that's usually what a lot of developers aim for, is like 25 hours of gameplay, something like that, so that every hour that the player is playing, they've made progress. So for Skyrim, say 25 hours of actual gameplay, but within those 25 hours, there's loading screens. So now we can literally say, for Skyrim alone, add in like 2 hours or even more. So almost 3 hours, I'd say. So instead of now that gameplay actually having 25 hours, the load screens are 3 of those hours. So now it only is 22 hours of gameplay. And with 22 hours of gameplay, the player doesn't realize that they were playing this game for actually 25 hours because of 3 hours of loading screens. Then the game's lagging, having to load in more things, add in another hour or so of that. So now the player has only played a game for 21 hours. What they were sold on was 25 hours of gameplay, but what they received is roughly like 20 hours of gameplay. Kind of sucks when you look at it in that way, but it's kind of hard to avoid that these days with how players are wanting things to be more realistic, more extravagant, and yada yada yada, more ultra realism, and that kind of eats into the graphics, that eats into load times and needing to create load times. Whereas we can fix that by being smarter developers, though. We can fix that by creating better graphics, better textures, better models that can be used and can trick the player into seeing ultra realism. Now, of course, for my game, I'm going for a more stylistic approach, so then I don't need to worry about that ultra realism, but I know I don't have that player market. I'm not advertising to that player market, so I don't need to worry about that market of players who are wanting the next gen ultra realism game, whereas I'm looking towards the market of players that are looking for the next big thing in the game design industry, or the next funnest game, the next interesting, most thought of something. Like, I'm looking for the players that more are more outside of the box type of thinking, where they're looking at video games being the art form that they are, a format that creates interesting content and uses our ability to create whatever we want to be a wonderfully and fun game in its own regards, while not having to be this next big ultra realistic game. Not saying that I don't like seeing that. There are plenty of games that I love seeing designers create highly realistic worlds. But when I actually get to playing them, as someone who designs games on my own, I kind of lose myself in that. I kind of get bored of that ultra realism because everybody can do it. We've seen that everyone can make a game that's ultra realistic, but it's not necessarily always the funnest game. It's very interesting and unique and exciting to see, but it's not the funnest game you've played out there. There's games like the newest Gears of War game. It's very realistic looking in a lot of different ways, but there's ultra realism in that game is brought down a peg, and it's very stylized realism. And of course, I know Gears of War might be the weirdest game to mention that, but I know their human proportions are very off, but at the same time, their human proportions make sense for the style that they went for. They didn't go for something that was realistic from beginning to end. They went with something that has its own depiction of life and realism and what makes the game look gorgeous and exciting. And that's what I aim to go for as well. I aim to go for, from a design standpoint, something that isn't necessarily realistic but has enough detailed information that players enjoy it and they get sucked into the style of it that it becomes real to the player. And I think that's what a lot of people forget, is that in our art medium as designers and creators for video games, we can literally design anything to be real. We can make our own flying spaghetti monster and players will love us for it. We can make our own Cthulhu beings, and we see tons of games making Cthulhu monsters and stuff like that and making them stylistically weird and real, but to the player it's living, it's life, it is what they're going through at that point. And so again, it's all over the place, but I really was, all this was going on in my mind while I was going through things over the past couple of weeks, and while editing this texture down and getting it to work for my game and adding in this landscape, I was thinking about all of this, and I wanted to make sure I shared that with you guys, because a lot of people I know play games and really think about a lot of different things while they play their games, but I know there's a lot of people who play games and don't know this side of development. And with how things are going, video games are being talked about in multiple different ways, and a lot of players will sit there and harp on one game but not on another, and they're both doing the same things, and it's just people not knowing the development cycles of games, not knowing the energy and time that developers put into these games and into these worlds, these characters, all of it. And so that's what I'm making sure I'm I'm like giving to you guys, and I'm putting front face value on everything, and you guys are seeing exactly what is going on to create these games. I know I'm not going to all the details and what these normal maps do, how I get this and that, but I'm wanting to at least express and show the work that goes into making just one game, and especially one game that's currently being made by me. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys comment down below questions, answers, just praise, critiques, whatever you guys want to comment down below. Say it down in the comments. I'll always reply back if I can. And please subscribe and like these videos. I'm working more on thinking about adding in actual gameplay videos, so like let's play videos to this channel where I discuss things that I can instantly see while playing games, like things that players don't usually see, the behind the scenes type things in video games that I can see. So stick around. Those videos will be popping up at some point when I get time for them. But with that said, see you guys in the next video.